Hey, what's up everybody, and welcome back to News Dose. And we got some interesting news in terms of Nintendo today, as they did talk about the Nintendo Switch Successor. And while I think that we all pretty much realize Nintendo is working on a Super Switch, as you will, well, they actually talk about the timing that this console will release. And I think it's definitely worth talking about, considering all of the rumors that has been running rampant across the industry over the last year or so. Now, we also have some Xbox news today, as yet another Xbox first-party game leaked out online. It has been crazy here recently with all of the Xbox leaks, and this really is coming from the same source, so we're going to go over that one as well. To get jump-started today, though, we're actually going to be talking about Elden Ring, and if that leaked footage of jumping got you excited about a week or so back, well, this is really going to have you excited because they showed 15 minutes of new gameplay for Elden Ring. And to just kind of put the gameplay short here, Elden Ring looks good, like really good. I mean, on one side, it's about what you'd expect coming from Software. It really has that combat formula that they have made just so popular with games like Dark Souls, Bloodborne, Demon's Souls, and even Sekiro. But here with Elden Ring, it's got this whole extra dynamic to it with this expansive world. And it actually looks like a pretty interesting fantasy-based world. But something that they really emphasize with this gameplay demo is the verticality. I mean, of course, you have a standard jump button, which is already groundbreaking for a From Software game, but on top of that, you also have a mount that can just kind of appear out of nowhere, similar to something like Immortals Phoenix Rising. It really reminds me of that game, but with Elden Ring, you can actually jump over entire mountains, which kind of just adds to that verticality that I was talking about before. Now, as for the combat itself, it does look a lot like Dark Souls, though it focuses a little bit more on abilities, it seems like, in this game. I think that might add an extra little layer to the combat, but yeah, with all the traversal options in here and the fantastic looking combat once again, I really think this demo is only going to have you more excited for the Elden Ring release on February 25th. And actually, they did announce a collector's edition as well, which includes things such as a statue, and will debut for $190. You can actually pick it up right now over on GameStop and Best Buy, and I believe it's going to be on the Bandai Namco store as well. Let me know what you thought about the gameplay demo for Elden Ring, though. Did you like it or not? Next up, a new update's going to be heading over to Marvel's Avengers sometime here soon, and I know with this game, you never really know if it's going to be good news or bad news, but here I do actually have some good news for PlayStation gamers in specific, and that is that Spider-Man DLC, which is finally on its way. Yes, they finally revealed a release date here, and it will be out on November 30th. Now, I understand that there's been a lot of controversy that's been linked to Spider-Man being exclusive to PlayStation consoles. Avengers, of course, is available on Xbox and PC as well. And with Spider-Man debatably being the most popular Marvel character, it seems to be a bit of an odd decision to leave so much of your fan base out when it comes to a big update like this. Truthfully, I'm not really a big fan of exclusive DLC either, regardless of what platform it's for. But with that said, apparently with this update, Spider-Man will team up with Ms. Marvel and Black Widow while struggling to decide whether he prefers working alone or as part of a team. So this does seem to be pretty interesting in terms of story, though I would like to see how this stacks up with Insomniac Spider-Man. I've said this before, but I think Insomniac has the best version I've ever seen of Spider-Man, not in just video games, but really just entertainment as a whole. I think that they did a phenomenal job with that game, and it'll be kind of hard to top that, so I definitely want to see how it stacks up with all of that. But if you have been anticipating this update, well, the good news, like I said before, is that it will be out this month on November 30th. Next up, we got some real interesting Nintendo news today, as the Nintendo president talked about the future of Nintendo. And while part of that future is their next gaming system, the successor to the Nintendo Switch. You can actually take a look at this graphic here where they show the future outlook, and you can see here, 2004 to 2006, you have the Nintendo DS and the Nintendo Wii. And then 11 years later, because we completely forgot about the Wii U, you have the Nintendo Switch. And then in 20XX, you have this big question mark showing next gaming system. So this is not some rumor or speculation. Nintendo's very own president very specifically talks about their next generation console, the successor to the Nintendo Switch. Now, right away, I don't think that this alone is interesting in itself, because I think most of us understands that these platform holders are always working on new hardware. And this graphic right here just basically acknowledges that, but they don't actually have a specific release date. It just says 20XX. That could be next year, that could be 2023, 2024, 2025. It could be beyond that. We don't really know. They're just basically acknowledging that they are planning to do a next generation gaming system. So like I said, that in itself is not interesting, but it's the context of what they said next that is so interesting. Nintendo's Furukawa had this to say: on next gen, we are not saying right now. We are still going through internal discussions on concept, timing, etc., and discussing everything. And then later on also says that the Switch remains in the middle phase of its life cycle. And that right there is the important part, because this is something that closely resembles what they said last year in 2020. Back in 2020, Furukawa also said that the Switch was barely halfway through its life. And what this means is that the Super Switch, the Nintendo Switch 2, is still likely years away. And I think that right there is important because there's a lot of speculation about the Nintendo Switch 2. At first, a lot of people were kind of talking about a Nintendo Switch Pro, and here recently, that conversation has moved on over to a Nintendo Switch Successor. So a lot of people are thinking that we could see a Nintendo Switch 2 in the next year or so. But with this right here, if the Switch is still only halfway in its life cycle, you're talking about a console that's 4 years old, it's going on 5. That means that it could be another 3 to 4 years before we see that successor. And I think for a lot of people, if the Nintendo Switch Successor doesn't release until 2024 or later, that might feel like a long life cycle. I mean, since the Nintendo 64, Nintendo has pretty consistently released a new home console about every 5 to 6 years. But something important to keep in mind here is that the Nintendo Switch is not just a home console. This is a hybrid handheld console as well. And their handheld releases are a little bit more random. If you look back at their history, the Game Boy released back in 1989. The Game Boy Color was 1998. That is 9 years later. And then the Game Boy Advance was 2001. The DS was 2004. So you had a 3-year difference there. And then the 3DS was in 2011. So as you can see there, it seems to be a little random when it comes to their handheld consoles. This could come down to advancing mobile technology at an affordable price. So you could treat this a little bit different than your typical home console. With that in mind though, I mean, I'm not saying that the Nintendo Switch Successor won't release by 2023. They could release a new Nintendo Switch console by then, and then just keep the original Switch going well after that. We saw that with the 3DS. The Switch came out and they just kept going with the 3DS. So it's not impossible, but it does sound like the Nintendo Switch Successor is still years away. If I were to guess myself, the very earliest I would expect a Nintendo Switch Successor is late 2023, but I think that there's a very good chance that we don't see or hear about a Switch 2 until 2024 or maybe even beyond that. The Switch is just so successful, it shows no signs of slowdown as it continues to sell out. And I mean, when all said and done, the Nintendo Switch very well possibly might end up being the best-selling console of all time. That's the type of success that Nintendo is looking at here with the Switch, so I don't think that they're really in any kind of rush to get that next generation console out just yet. I think the Switch OLED will be the main device for a little while now. Now, we have been hearing some rumors of a 4K Switch. Maybe we hear something about that next year. Nintendo does like to update their consoles pretty regularly, so who knows, we might hear about a DLSS 4K device. But as for that Switch Successor, it does sound like we're still going to be waiting a few more years before that happens. Let me know what you think about this in the comments below, though. When do you think we will see a quote-unquote Nintendo Switch 2? Now, we also have yet another Xbox game that leaked out online. Yeah, I can't make this stuff up. It just keeps happening, and it really just keeps coming from the same source. I said this about a week or so ago, but Xbox has a legitimate Jeff Grubb and Jez Corden problem. Like, these two very specifically have been leaking game after game after game when it comes to Xbox. It really is just crazy by this point. And well, Jeff Grubb did leak out another one on his podcast, being Josh Sawyer's next game. Now, Josh Sawyer is a very prestigious RPG developer. Of course, he works over at Obsidian Entertainment, but he has worked on some of the greatest RPGs of all time. You take a look at his resume, and he's worked on games like Icewind Dale, Neverwinter's Nights 2, you have Alpha Protocol, Fallout New Vegas, Pillars of Eternity, and then also The Outer Worlds. I mean, you're talking about a fantastic resume of RPGs, and well, his next RPG has now leaked out online. The first thing that you should probably know about this game is that it is being developed by a small team. So don't expect some big AAA experience here. You're not going to get the next Skyrim here or anything like that. This is going to be a smaller scope game. But it actually does sound interesting, which we'll go over that here in just a moment. Thanks to this Reddit post, though, you can take a look at a summary of what Jeff Grubb had to say. So apparently this game will be focusing on experimental mechanics and interactions. Like I said before, it's still being developed by a small team. It's set in 16th century Europe setting, still planned to have no combat. It's a murder mystery RPG. You'll be investigating a murder by talking to people and building a case. You can accuse people of murder. You'll possibly continue to play even if you get it wrong and see the consequences. It's also being planned to be coming out in 2022, and that's the big one right there. You're actually going to get to play this one really soon, apparently. More than likely, if this is true, we will get an official announcement for this game sometime here soon. And based off of this brief description here, I think it actually sounds really interesting. I mean, first off, Josh Sawyer being attached to this game is already going to bring some excitement, just considering his past work. But I think based off of this brief description here, this game also sounds really unique and can offer something just a little bit different than some other RPGs on the market. A lot of these Western RPGs are more fantasy and sci-fi based, but here, focusing on a murder mystery, I think that right there is already intriguing, but also the fact that this game is going to have no combat. That means this game will probably be a little bit more thought-provoking and focus on its story and characters just a little bit more. Take a look at games like Planescape Torment or Disco Elysium. These are games that do not focus on combat, but thanks to their writing and character choices, these games actually sit among the all-time greats within the genre. And with that in mind, Josh Sawyer does have some experience working on games like this. Josh Sawyer apparently started at Interplay working in an associate role on Planescape Torment. So he does have the experience to make a game like that. Now, there's still a lot of questions when it comes to this game, though, but kind of looking at some of Josh Sawyer's games in the past, I mean, he's worked on a lot of these top-down games such as Planescape. He's worked on Icewind Dale as well as Pillars of Eternity. And because this is a smaller scope game, it does have me wondering if this is going to be that style of game. Personally, I'm more than okay with that, and I think for all those fans out there that's recently found Disco Elysium and just loving that game so much, yeah, I think this might be a game that fits that type of gameplay style, and it really, I think it's just a breath of fresh air. With that said, Obsidian Entertainment has quite a bit going on. Not only are they working on The Outer Worlds 2, they have Avowed, which is this first-person RPG. Then you have Grounded, which is a survival RPG. And now you also have this Josh Sawyer project as well, which looks to release possibly in 2022. So one more topic that we need to go over here real quick is the race to acquire basically every studio across the industry. We've seen a lot of this in the last couple years, and well, Devolver Digital has now acquired multiple studios, and actually some pretty good ones for that matter. Yeah, so they officially unveiled that they've acquired 3 studios, being Dodge Roll, Crow Team, and then Firefly Studios. And like I said, that's actually some pretty notable developers. These studios don't necessarily make huge AAA games or anything like that, but they do make some pretty popular independent games. Dodge Roll was actually the studio behind Enter the Gungeon, which is often listed as one of the best independent games in the industry. So that one is an interesting pickup. And then as far as Crow Team, this is a team that I really like. They're pretty popular for working on the Serious Sam franchise, but the one that I personally really like a lot would be Talos Principle. I would probably list Talos Principle as one of the most interesting puzzle games behind something like Portal. It really reminds me a lot of Portal in a lot of ways. It's both unique as well as clever. So that one is a really big pickup as well. Now, as for Firefly Studios, I haven't played these games, but they actually work on the Stronghold series. So there you have it. Devolver Digital picked up some small but interesting studios here, and I think this is exactly what you want. These games will continue to be multi-platform going forward, and that right there is something that I think that you're going to want for independent games just like this. I'd rather Devolver Digital, which is a pretty good publisher, to have picked them up as opposed to somebody like Microsoft, Sony, or Nintendo. This way, these games do stay multi-platform going forward. And before we head into the weekend, though, we do have one last thing to go over here, and that would be the poll of the day. And something that I always kind of hear people complain about is how their backlog just continues to grow and grow. I know mine definitely grows on a daily basis, it almost seems. But I wanted to ask you all, how many games do you have in your backlog? And well, the results here was highly interesting to say the least, because as you look here, 9% of you said you have 1 to 3 games in your backlog, 10% said 4 to 6, 5% said 7 to 9, 7% of you said 10 to 12, while 69% of you said too many to count. And you know what? I completely feel your all's pain here. This is both a good thing and a bad thing because, I mean, on one side, we're never going to be short on games. I could probably take a year off from buying new games and have plenty of games to play in my backlog, but at the same time, it's just so hard to keep up. You kind of always want to complete these games, but you're just never capable of doing so. That's kind of where the problem lies. But I think for me, when my backlog really started to grow was when I started buying Steam games. When I built my first PC, I was introduced to Steam games and just their insane sales over there. So I started picking up all of these games because, you know, they're like $2 or $5 or whatever. So I picked up all these games, and then like 7 years later, I still haven't completed them. So that's where my backlog really started to grow, but now you have things like Xbox Game Pass. That certainly doesn't help at all. And then to just kind of top it off, I feel like now there's more games, more interesting games than ever before releasing at just rapid fire. It's just, there's constantly something new to look forward to, and it really is hard to keep up. It's actually one of the reasons I get a little tired of all of these games being like 50 hours long. I'm personally more than okay if we just make a 10-hour long game. I'd be perfectly happy with that. But yes, I absolutely feel your all's pain here. It's hard to keep up. Anyways, though, that's it for this episode. But if you liked the video, don't forget to bell notification and subscribe button for more content just like this. Also, if you'd like to support the channel through Patreon, thank you for making this content possible. Peace out.